Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you will allow, since on energy I will speak about such relevant issues as energy, I will speak in our mother tongue. Mr. Minister Sałek, before he began working in the President's office, he was also in the Deputy Minister in Climate Policy in Prime Minister Szydło's government. The subject matter of our panel, Energiewende, a considerably interesting subject, and in short, energy transformation, let's call it in German, and we spoke in the Cold War, so we were concerned that we were going to be speaking about Germany without Germans, but with the organizers we've agreed that Björn Peters is German in origin and roots, and it won't be so difficult. We'll be able to have a little bit of a discussion. The first mentions on Energiewende I found in literature going back to 1980. That was for the first time where there was mention and that term used, and those were the first steps that Germany will move away from nuclear energy. The first action which I believe was undertaken was at the time of Chancellor Schroeder's presidency, and there was a decision to close the first nuclear units. But formally speaking, Energiewende came into the legal discourse and social circles in 2010-11, I would say. With the conducive lobbying those transformation, the conditions that we were just fresh after the reactor accident at Fukushima. So energy vendors, as many partisans it had as many on the other side. And what was interesting is, despite the fact that we were going into RESs, this was the main objective of Germany, but at the same time closing nuclear units. And this was the entire controversy. I don't want to speak about it too much as an introduction. In the beginning, I would like to ask the gentleman how in 2011 you received the decision, how you evaluate it, and also a short statement whether in light of recent events in the Ukraine specifically I'm speaking, do you perceive that Energiewende has the right of being and to conclude with success as the Germans planned? Were they able to implement it? Mr. Minister, we are hosts, so let's begin with our guests, foreign guests, and maybe Professor Furfari would take the floor.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you. Unfortunately, I will have to leave today, so I will miss the rest of the conference. Thank you for reminding that Energiewende started in 1980. And the first paper talking about Energiewende, at that time it was 2 words. And now it's 1 word, but at the beginning it was 2 words. The title of the document was an energy transition, an Energiewende, for progress and development without oil and without nuclear. It was 12 years before the Conference of Rio. Conference of Rio, where we adopted the Convention on Climate Change. 12 years before the climate change, there was already this idea to get rid of oil and nuclear. So it's not because of climate change that they want to have the Energiewende, is because, first of all, they don't like oil, because oil is a symbol of progress and the society of market. The society of market developed thanks to oil. And the second thing, they hate nuclear energy. They hate nuclear energy for diverse reasons. Also for the pacifism. Why not? And all the consequences of that are that today you should not believe that Energiewende is about CO2. It's about fighting the market and fighting the development of the most important energy for the future, nuclear energy. Why it's important, nuclear energy? We have been asked to give solutions. The world will grow in population, and energy is life. We cannot survive without energy. If everybody is panicking today, it's because we are afraid of the energy situation. Growing population will need a growing demand of energy. And of course, a growing demand of electricity, because our world depends on electricity. Therefore, you can be sure that there will be a high request of electricity in all the world and not only in the EU. That means that we need to think to electrify Africa, where only 50% of the population have access to electricity. And not only 50%, but a few hours a day, or a week, or a month. Therefore, Africa will continue to develop if they have electricity. And it will not be with wind energy. Why? We have been able to develop renewable energy, wind and solar, because we have the base load. Wind energy produces 21% of the time, in average in the EU. And solar panel, 11% of the time, as an average. That means that for more than 80% of the time, you need to have something else. That means something existing. If there was no base in the EU, we would never have the development of renewable. But in Africa, there is no base. Therefore, they cannot develop renewable energy. And here and there are sometimes some projects, but those are financed by Germany to help Siemens to sell machines. It's not the market. Why are they so aggressive against nuclear? Because nuclear will help people to have abundant and cheap energy. And this is something that they do not want. Because behind all this, there is also the willingness to limit population. Behind the Energiewende, there is also Malthusianism. Don't be misled that climate change is an excuse. To the point that if really they want to limit CO2 emission, why they oppose to the energy which not produce CO2? Nuclear. Nuclear produces 25% of electricity in the EU. And it is the larger share of electricity generation. Wind is 13%, and nuclear is more than the double of that. But they refuse including in the taxonomy. You imagine, after some fight, 11 countries have been able to put pressure on the Commission, and the Commission have accepted nuclear energy in taxonomy. And Germany, which is struggling to replace gas from Russia, say that they want to close the nuclear power plant still in operation in Germany today. And they oppose to the taxonomy. So you see, it's nothing to do with climate change. It's just an ideology against the nuclear energy. I would like also to say that despite the fact that the Commission nowadays looks only at the Green Deal and Fit 55, it was not the case in the past. In 2000, Mr. Prodi with Loyola de Palacio have published a green paper for security of supply. I was deeply involved in this paper. And the paper was very wise, saying we will need energy, and the first thing to do is to have energy, to improve our security of supply. It was the title of the paper. And there were a simple strategy: diversification of the energy, diversification of the country, and diversification of the means of transporting gas, including LNG, therefore. And you see, we have done the reverse. Because of climate change, we've done the complete reverse of that. So I think that it's time to say to the population, like Mr. Jose Rivera said this morning, it's time to say to the population that the solution is to have conservative energy. We will not get rid of oil, we will not get rid of gas, we will not get rid of coal, we will not get rid of nuclear, because we need energy. Since 1974, we are pushing for alternative energy. Today, wind and solar represent in the EU 2.9%. I'm talking about energy, not about electricity. It's always so easy to mention the number for electricity. But you look at the reality of energy, wind and solar is 2.9. How can we dream to reach 100? It's just impossible. It's why I think that we have to explain to people that the good quality of life that we have today has been possible because of conservative energy. Everything that we have, including good health and good food, is thanks to conservative energy. If we drop that, we will collapse.
To tak ja tylko chciałem podsumować.
I would like to summarize. I would like to summarize the professor's statement and also put forth a thesis. In your consideration, Professor, in your opinion, Energiewende, so German transformation of energy, which with the main assumption was that it should counteract climate change, didn't become anticlimactic completely. Do you agree with that, Professor?
Yes, I agree with that. So you summary.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I'm new to this group, so I'll introduce myself a little bit. I'm a trained physicist. I got into the business life after my PhD via McKinsey, and then joined the financial sector. I did a few commodity and energy financing jobs there, and since 6 years I'm a self-employed consultant. Actually, I was just mentioning this. I got into energy policies 10 years ago when I studied the behavior of pumped hydro, and I realized that the business case is over for very deep, fundamentally deep reasons. It is about statistical analysis that I presented numerous times in conferences, and apparently that was a new angle to the energy policy space, but it didn't trickle through to the policymakers well enough, unfortunately. At the time, 2016, my dream job would have been energy minister of Germany, but I'm totally off this idea. I've joined 3 years ago the team that developed the dual fluid technology, which is a very innovative nuclear reactor technology, and I think by developing. I joined as a CFO now. We founded the company last year, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and I believe if I'm doing a good job there, this will have a much larger impact on the global policy debate when you provide good solutions that work in the daily practical life as compared to being the emperor of China or the president of something. Now back to the energy transition. We found out with lots of discussions with philosophers that it is actually more than this 1980, this Energiewende book. Many people forget when they think about Germany that Germany is not only the home country of Werner Siemens, Mercedes-Benz, and all these wonderful people who built our economy, and not to forget that we used to be the pharmacy of the world, essentially, with our chemical industry. But we were as well the home country of Samuel Hahnemann, the inventor of the homeopathy, and Rudolf Steiner, the inventor of anthroposophy. And so if we want to understand the Energiewende, we need to go back to the end of the 19th century. There was the natural philosophy was coming up, and people wanted to be in the flow of nature. These ideas were picked up by socialists, you mentioned it correctly, Professor. And the one part of the socialist movement was the National Socialist Movement called Nazis. In 1927, Franz Lawacek published a book on the economy of the Third Reich, and it was all about we need wind power and wind high towers, Reichswindkrafttürme, they were called. Lots of the wind energy development were taking place in the Third Reich. And shortly after the war, around 1950, I don't remember exactly when, Heidegger published his famous essay, Die Technik und die Kehre, and re-emphasized this, this idea that you have to live from the flow of nature, and it has to be variable. And it was, of course, opposed to anything that we cherish. He even opposed hydropower because it was too steady. So, but wind energy was fine. And so we need to understand these roots, that it is a socialist idea, and being it socialist in the sense of communism or of national socialism, so Nazi ideology, they all live from the idea that nature and everything is scarce, and essentially it is a matter of controlling who gets which resources, and that there's a planning economy who can do this much better than every individual or any market economy. Now, looking forward, I don't want to repeat what you totally correctly said about the so why nuclear energy is out of the business. Well, maybe one thing, one governing thought of the Energiewende in Germany was actually to take power away from big multinational and national companies. And the utilities. So if everybody is his own producer of energy, that's some sort of democratizing of the energy sector. Of course, that's a totally erroneous idea. If you do this from weather-dependent sources, no system requires as much central planning as a system that builds on weather-dependent sources. Europe is even too small that is to balance out solar and wind energy on its territory. You need to include Northern Africa and Russia until Middle Siberia in order to do so. So you need lots of national cooperation or international cooperation in order to bring such a system to life. And mostly people don't think about it, don't care about it. Yesterday I read the draft law for wind power build out in Germany. There's not even the faintest hint of understanding of the true challenges of an energy system that is mostly that depends mostly on weather-dependent sources, and so. Taking it one step further, so what do we really need? There has been a lot of framing going on from the left side, and this socialist and Nazi, the fascist side, in order to talk us into weather-dependent source of energy, and they call it renewable energy, which is of course. Yeah, it is. It doesn't make sense at all, to put it politely. We need to frame this type of technology weather dependent, so that it connotates that we need to think about the properties of weather before we make us dependent on these sources. And of course, it is a strategy that makes us even more dependent on certain commodity imports, which we don't have in Europe. So that is a very important point as well. And for the future, I believe we should leave all this behind us and develop a new conservative idea on how to fix the planet in a market economy. And I'm trying to develop such ideas, but this will be probably more the topic of tomorrow's panel on the future of ecological ideas. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you very much to Veronika, Dunin, and another people which organized this event. Dziękuję za to, że mogę kilka słów powiedzieć.
Thank you very much for being able to say a few words on behalf of the President. The President approaches issues of Energiewende and how approaching to Energiewende. I am very pleased to hear what Professor Furfari and Dr. Björn. I'm very pleased that Dr. Björn also represents the German side, because we are speaking about Energiewende, which is a German idea, and we don't have a German representative here in the room, as Piotr Zacharski, who is the moderator, mentioned. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to mention one important thing, because Professor Furfari and Dr. Björn mentioned about a certain philosophical or historical point in the perspective of nature. In the 20-year period between the wars, the protection of the wolf was introduced. And this was the kind of naturalistic approach, like our colleagues mentioned, has its reference to Energiewende. But a lot was spoken about the last century. I would like to refer to issues which are more modern and current, because in my opinion, Energiewende in Europe, implemented in different European countries, started from the conclusion of the summit in 2007 in Brussels, and the famous 3x20 package that was realized with the objective of until 2020, when we had 20% of RESs obtained, 20% limit CO2 emissions, increase energy efficiency by 20%, and in a certain sense these objectives were achieved. Poland, which very skeptically approached that situation and realized its RES goal, despite the fact that we reasonably spoke in 2007 and 2008 about these matters, and we were successful. Our 15% objective was achieved. I believe that we are also honestly approaching climate protection and energy transformation. But countries affluent, rich countries, smaller countries in the European Union, which very strongly raised voices about higher climate ambitions in those times, had to, in line with energy, approach flows, inter-system flows to fill out their and achieve their goal related to green energy. I'm speaking about this specifically because on the international arena, especially European, Poland had a very reasonable voice, and the example from the 3x20 package and achieving RES by that level by 2020 showed that we are able to do it. We just need the time, and at the same time we are not using the mechanisms and, let's say, loopholes, legal loopholes, not to realize the commitment or obligation that we have. Going further, if we look at Energiewende from a European perspective, let's remember that the 3x20 package from a legislative perspective was proposed in 2008 in January. And then that same year, in December, it was passed by the European Parliament 4 directives on RESs, energy efficiency, and emissions trading. Then it was accepted by the Commission, and that huge legislative package became binding in spring of 2019. Why am I mentioning this? That is because if there is political will in the European Union, in Brussels, in the European Commission, then various things can be put through and implemented, including 4 directives in 1 year in the entire negotiating process. I will refer this to what we are discussing because the war in the Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, has changed everything deeply. And importantly, those big slogans about energy security and supply security in certain areas have put down their banners, because when I checked from 2008 and I looked through the conclusions of the European Council conclusions, there was 100 times written energy security, and at the moment of war in Europe, suddenly it turns out that that security is not working. Of course, we have certain successes in terms of building interconnectors financed from EU resources, the expansion of storages, new connections, or something that is related to Baltic Pipe. I agree with that, but in the case of a war in Europe, we have very serious issues and problems. And God forbid, what if the war was in some way in the European Union? We could imagine that. Then we would be really, truly in a very difficult situation. My opinion is that Poles always had a common sense approach in terms of energy transformation. The energy transformation not being yet in the European Union, we were involved. If we look at the Silesian region is a beautiful example how from heavy industry, high emissions heavy industry, we can go on to a low emissions economy, how the region has so positively changed. That's Katowice. It's the capital of Śląsk, of Silesia. It's a city where before on a hard coal mine on the territory, there was the COP24, and that was the symbol of that conference in 2018, the path of energy transformation and economic transformation, that Poles could organize a conference on climate at a location of a previous mine, where right now there is a beautiful conference center. So, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of that reality has to be maintained. I have to say that I'm an engineer by profession, and I was involved in also energy subject areas, and let's not avoided that in terms of thermodynamics or electrothermodynamics or grid flows. These are not political declarations. You cannot overcome certain things. Do we have the energy in the grid or do we not? Is there stabilization? Is there balancing in the grid or isn't there? Referring to what Professor Furfari mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, I agree with that, because if we say that during the year we have over 8,500 hours in general, and an energy installation is working about 7,500 hours. And today, with even the best wind parameters of wind farms or photovoltaics, we have security of about 2,000 hours per year. Now, so the question is, from where do we take the rest? We have to supplement the rest, and that's obvious and clear. As we're all here and using the electrical energy as we see, we want to have a assurance of the energy delivery and energy security. So the security of deliveries, of supply, not only in terms of generation, but also distribution and delivery. This is key. And coming back to the title of our conference, I believe that this type of approach, a reasonable, sensible, common sense approach, broadly understood, conservative in Europe, especially in Poland, it exists.
And lastly, there is a huge misunderstanding in the EU. According to conclusions from the summit from 2002, by 2050 the European economy should be carbon or climate neutral. And I usually mention this because there is a misunderstanding. Climate neutrality is a term from the Paris Accord, and the Paris Accord covers all countries globally. So we cannot be speaking about being climate neutral in the EU by 2050, because according to the Paris Accord's definition, this is not what we are talking about, because this is not the same as the Paris Accord definition, because according to the EU conclusions, this is decarbonizing Europe. And what Paris Accords mean, this is not decarbonizing. But in Europe, this is how we understand this. Unfortunately, we have taken measures which will be very costly to decarbonize everything, to remove every carbohydrate from the hydrocarbons from the energy mix. I'm a supporter of energy efficiency and of the renewables, etc. But in Europe we want to reduce greenhouse gases, but we tend to forget mitigation and adaptive measures. And I don't want to go into financing and the EU funds, because I have huge objections here in terms of the EU and Africa. So one more question to you, Minister. The government, the ruling coalition, well, when it won the election, it took over power after the Civic Platform and the People's Party. And I have a question, because you took over a certain status quo. Beata Szydło was the minister, and Energiewende was spilling over other countries and the European Union, the European Commission. And I would like to ask you about what the situation was like back then in Poland when you and Minister Szyszko were dealing with these issues back then. Well, briefly, in 2015, Poland negotiated the Paris Accord, and then Prime Minister Szydło signed it, and the president ratified it, and it was a huge success. And it was so, among other reasons, because during the negotiations in 2015, a huge pressure was put on including decarbonization into the Paris Accord. And back then, some countries didn't agree. Poland also protested against it in a very strong way because Poland didn't want to accept decarbonization, well, the way it was phrased. And let me just stress, it was a huge success. Thank you, Minister. Professor, would you like to add a point?
Yes. In geopolitics, geopolitics of energy, sorry, we have three units. We measure energy with joule or kilowatt hour, but in geopolitics we need to have in mind 3 units. The first unit is the unit of time. Everything needs tens of years. We cannot expect to get rid of Russian gas next month. It takes years. Even if we want to build a connection between France and Spain, as we should do, it will take a few years. So, times. And the 2020 was not respecting this unit of time. The second unit is the unit of account, billions. We need billions. Commission have published a few days ago a report. They were proud to say that between 2014 until 2020, they spent 221 billion for decarbonization. And for them, it's a good thing. But if you calculate the cost of the CO2 avoided, you reach 4,000 euro per avoided ton of CO2. Of course, they can say, but this is for the future. But anyway, this gives the perspective. We spend a lot, and we reach very little. The third unit is the space. The space in energy geopolitics is the world, and not the municipalities like in Germany dreaming. Why? Because the energy issue is a global issue. And you will not be solving it in North Rhine-Westphalia, not in the EU. It will be solved globally in the world. And if you find a solution here, costing a lot, and the rest of the world do not care, you will be killed economically. Since 1992, the Rio Conference, the world CO2 emission have increased by 58%. Are we joking here to say that we want to save the planet on our own when the others are burning more and more coal? During my first time in the Commission, I've developed the clean coal technology. And now the clean coal technology is sold by Chinese company. And here in Poland, we put pressure on coal firing. And China is building every 2 weeks a new coal-fired power plant with our technology. So I think that it's important to keep in perspective and to explain people that we will need to be much more wise in what we are doing. I'm not very against the fact that the Commission has tried with renewable energy. Why not? It was important to try. But now we have the proof that it's not working. We have the proof that the 2020 is not working. So we should start to say, okay, we spend a lot of money, but no, it's enough.
Teraz chciałbym się zwrócić do pana doktora.
I have a question now to Mr. Björn Peters.
Niemcy w ramach Energiewende rozpoczęły plan i wdrażają go.
Under Energiewende, Germany has been phasing out nuclear energy and shutting them down between 2021 and January 2022. It has shut down 3 other blocks, and there are about 3 left, about a few gigawatts. So I have a question. This decision, this choice to phase out these blocks, was this decision justified and well thought through, or maybe it was too abrupt? Germany wanted to make up for it with Russian gas, but maybe it wasn't a wise decision.
Yes, of course. It was not a wise decision. To put in a few numbers, in 1990 until 2000, so before the nuclear phase-out, we used to have about 190 terawatt-hours of nuclear energy, so carbon-free energy in the grid. With the nuclear phase-out starting in 2002, I believe, with the first phase-out, of the first power plant being shut down, and in particular in 2011, and the simultaneous build-up of wind and solar industry, it took us until 2017, I believe, till we replaced only the carbon-free energy from nuclear power. And as it happens, these nuclear power plants are among the safest and most reliable in the world, as measured in the utilization ratio of every year. So there's a global list of the most reliable nuclear power plants that is issued every year, and usually there were 5 to 8 German nuclear power plants among the top 10. So certainly, nuclear energy could have played a good role if decarbonization had been a priority for the Greens, but they're actually more a coal party in effect and a gas party. A few more numbers. Germany has spent 550 billion euros so far, mostly on biogas, wind and solar energy. So hydropower doesn't play a big role. It's about 2% of the German power market, because we have good locations in the south, but in the north we don't. And the way this was rolled out was problematic. If you just take an immature technology and throw lots of money on it, you attract the wrong people. And the industry is totally compromised. It's a level of government corruption. They can't speak out against it because they cash in so much of this money. And that is something we need to understand. It is a totally non-market driven transformation. And that is something we have to overcome. Now to the more recent events. It is actually the Ampel, so the streetlight coalition in Germany, called streetlight coalition because the party colors are red for the socialists, yellow for the liberals, and green for the Greens. The streetlight coalition negotiated, when they negotiated their coalition agreement, they said, okay, we need a transitory form of energy, and it was actually Robert Habeck. I know this from the people who negotiated with him, so friends in the Liberal Party, who told me it was Robert Habeck who said we need to build 35 gigawatts of gas power in order to replace coal and nuclear energy, and at the time. energy crisis had already started. It started last year, in the middle of the last year, that gas prices went through the roof. So the signs were clearly there, but nobody read them. And now, of course, with the Ukraine war, that's a very cold bath for all of these ideas, a very cold reality check. And since then, actually, I'm measuring the popularity of nuclear energy in the population, in the German amongst Germans, since a little bit more than a year. And at the time, we were quite surprised to find 48% of the people in Germany in favor of nuclear energy, and only 42% opposing it, which was more than we had hoped for, actually. Over the year 2021, it went up to about 52–53%, and since the beginning of the Ukraine war, we're now at 65% pro-nuclear and 28% against it. In this measurement, and of course it's always a question how you ask, and some people find, or some polling institutions find slightly different numbers, but there is a majority for nuclear energy in Germany. The three parties in the government, two of them, the socialists, killed. They were the pro-nuclear party in the 1970s. So they developed all this beautiful nuclear build-out program. Only that they didn't follow up after Chernobyl. They thought this is too dangerous and cut off all the funding for universities and the rollout plan for nuclear energy that we had similar to France. The Greens, they were founded out of hatred against the chemical and the nuclear industry in Germany, both leading. There's even some hints that it was the GDR Secret Service who invented this strategy of destroying West Germany by destroying their most successful industries. And those people were trained in those Stalinistic boot camps. They, from the Kommunistische Bund Westdeutschlands in the 1970s, they went all into the Green Party after it was founded in 1979. So it is difficult. So for the Greens, it's the only party where there is a majority against nuclear energy. And since the Ukraine crisis, the Social Democrats have actually turned around in the opinion of the electorate, and of course politicians and media people are slower to adapt to such new ideas because they have their history and their fear of speaking out for nuclear energy because it was not a winning topic. For the Liberal Party, 90% of them are pro-nuclear, but not Christian Lindner. He was key in killing nuclear energy in 2011. It was a government then at the time with the Liberals and the Conservatives. But only this week, for the first time, he has spoken out for a lifetime extension. But whether it will be sufficient to do this against the Greens, who own the environmental ministry, and that's more than any other party. So all the people in that ministry are essentially from the Greens, and nobody replaced this layer of people who don't really work but do party policies in that ministry. So it's a huge problem. I've written about it, and that for example the responsibility for the nuclear energy needs to be phased out of this ministry because there's not enough competency in order to do an ideology-free debate on whether or not to do a lifetime extension. Public opinion is swinging drastically, in particular since the last 4 months. But whether it will be enough, the Greens try to drag out this decision until it's not possible any longer to do something about it.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you. I'm a conservative when it comes to energy. During my degree, I was taught that, well, energy security comes first and the environment comes second. I'm a researcher in the Environmental Protection Institute. It's a state-owned research agency, and I mostly deal with industrial emissions. So I'm quite surprised by the Greens' approach, the Greens' perspective, because they, in a sense, they contradict themselves. Because the international panel, the IPCC panel, says clearly that nuclear energy is a must if we want to meet the goals and combat global warming. So on the one hand, they want to tackle climate change, but on the other hand, they contradict themselves. So to conclude, let's start with you, Minister, then you, Professor, and you, Doctor. So please sum up, please wrap up. And please express your own opinion on, in general, on the European transformation. What do you think? Is Europe capable of meeting its ambitious climate goals by 2030, 40, 50? Thank you. Let me stress that the Fund for Renewable Energy Sources is a expense item in the budget, which is actually not included in the budget. So this is out of the budget expense. It's off budget. The whole green energy is off budget. Well, and also secondly, we need to carry on with the energy transformation, but it needs to be plausible and realistic. Let me refer to what was said during the COP summit in Katowice a few years ago. So President Andrzej Duda said back then that if we are to embark on the energy transformation, it needs to be fair. It needs to be fair for people, for those people who live in the mining areas, in the mining towns. This is a must, because people cannot suffer because of that. And only a fair and just transformation can be successful. But unfortunately, we have these big words of fair, of just transformation. We have the transformation fund, the just transformation fund and mechanism. But at the same time, Poland a few months ago had to face a situation where only a single administrative decision could shut down the whole block in Turów, which accounts for 8% of the whole energy. But this is what you can't do precisely. You cannot force someone overnight to please now shut down the second largest power plant in Poland. And this is what happened in Turów. And this situation is a stark contradiction of just and fair transformation. It's a complete contradiction. At the same time, you have these big words in Europe, just transition. And also, let me tell you one thing. In all European documents now, they are trying to phase out all the hydrocarbons. So look at the taxonomy. So the financing institutions cannot finance hydrocarbons. And now we have the war. The prices have skyrocketed, and the financing institutions now face a problem. Let me give you a few examples. This famous regulation about methane emissions from mines, which is now subject to negotiations in the EU, and this will be directly applicable to all the member states. And actually, only with these regulations, you will have to stop any mining activity in some states. Also take hydro plants. Now, according to the water directive, you can only build reservoirs which are flow through or dry. So you cannot invest in hydro plants in these legal framework, because now, if you look at hydro pumps, now they are the only way of storing energy, but in the taxonomy they are not considered a storage facility for energy. Also, the famous 55 kilograms per megawatt hour. A few years ago, it was part of the Energy Union, and this is also part of the European Investment Bank documents. Now it's 250 kilograms per megawatt, 1 megawatt per hour. This is, well, I mean emissions here. And it means gigantic problems for energy suppliers, because take energy made from biomass, hydrocarbons and coal, the cost is so huge. But that sometimes it's extremely hard. But let me say something optimistic to conclude. Hopefully, Poland will follow on its path of energy transformation. But let me stress that hopefully it will be a just transformation.
In most of the energy conference, including today, and it's normal, we talk a lot about electricity. But electricity in the EU represents 22% of the energy demand. When we talk about windmill, but also nuclear, we talk about 22% of the demand. The rest need fuel. The rest need fuel because we need high temperature to heat processes, chemical furnaces in industry. You need fuel. And we will not escape from that. That means that talking about Energiewende and just looking at the sympathetic technology of wind and solar, because hydro is limited, and wood they do not want. So we are missing the point, and it's why we are going to miss the objective, because we have no solution for the fuels. This is why Mr. Putin have made the war. He knows that. Brussels, they do not know, but Putin knows that we need fuels. Probably you have read the Repower strategy, which has been published the 18th of May. But if you look at that, it's full of wishful thinking. You imagine they say that local authorities should play a role to convince people to reduce the temperature at house. Well, are we going to be serious on energy and not talking about stupid things like that? And the second thing, we would like to improve the energy efficiency of buildings. Of course, who doesn't want that? But the first directive is 2010. 12 years ago, we were saying the same thing. And now they came and they repeat the same thing. They want to push for heat pump. Okay? But in the same time, they publish, they are debating in the parliament, a directive, a regulation, not a directive, a regulation, to limit the use of fluorinated gas, which are indispensable for heat pump. So you see, it's full of contradiction. But the most ridiculous thing, No, the most one. One of the most ridiculous things is the hydrogen. Hydrogen has been invented by German to find solution for Energiewende. When there is too much wind, for time being, Germany sells the electricity at negative price.
1927 in that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And therefore, you see that Germany needs a solution, and they invented hydrogen. But I work on hydrogen as soon as I joined the Commission. I wrote a book, I advise you to read the book, The Hydrogen Illusion, which showed that it's a real illusion to talk about hydrogen. I will not enter into the details. But how is it possible that German companies or German government say that they want to go in Africa to produce hydrogen for the rich German when poor Africans have no electricity? I think that we are really mad. But the worst thing in the Repower document is at the end of the document, they say that they want to produce hydrogen in Ukraine. Of course, they say when it will be, when the time will be appropriate, we want to import hydrogen from Ukraine. But Ukraine is producing zero on renewable energy and producing a lot. 55% of electricity in Ukraine is nuclear. So Germans want to import hydrogen from nuclear energy in Ukraine, where we know this dramatic situation of energy situation for energy in Ukraine. What does it mean? It means that they are in cul-de-sac. They are blocked. They try to invent solution, but there is no solution. If you end up to say that you want to import hydrogen from Ukraine, it's really because you are desperate. And the solution is to change our mind in Europe. We need to change the mind of the population and the media and insist that what we have today is thanks to conservative energy, the fossil fuel and nuclear. I would like to conclude with, at the entrance there is a nice picture of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said that if it moves, you tax it. If it keeps moving, you regulate it. If it stops moving, you subsidize. It's exactly what we are doing for the time being.
I agree with most of it, but not with everything. We all tend to overestimate what we can do in 1 year. We all tend to underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And time is actually exactly a very important component. I think there's not the single chance that we meet the 2030 goals. Without ruining the economy or ripping the social contract. We can do both, but it's not sustainable. For 2050, I am less pessimistic, and that's why I said I rather left the direct policy space and joined that company, and then and we really need to advertise it. And we're not the only one, but it's the one that I happen to know best, of course. Dual Fluid Energy is a company that exactly will offer, if we are successful in our development, a technical solution, not to power only, but to all the other sectors. We innovate the nuclear energy sector in 3 ways. Number one is that we use metal uranium fuel. The second is we operate at 1,000 degrees Celsius, so we are very well able to provide a source of industrial process heat or for synfuel production. Even hydrogen production makes sense then. Yes, if it comes from a nuclear source. it doesn't make so much sense, or it has a very high economic cost burden on it when you first build solar or wind power plants. Then use the power when it's there to transform it to hydrogen. You lose 30% approximately, and so that's costly. But if you use directly the process heat, then that's much better. And actually, some of the development was done in Poland, in Schwecz and in Szczecin. So one of our founders is a professor of physics in Szczecin. So we got not into the program. The HTGR was selected 5 years ago or so, but we were not ready yet, and I understand the decision because HTGRs are built on the globe. They're a little bit further advanced, but we will get there. We will try to build our first nuclear reactor by 2030 and get into serious production in the middle of the 2030s. And we are not the only company in the nuclear sector who does this. So there is a number of the Moltex, for example, follows a similar strategy, and the strategy is industrialize nuclear energy. In nuclear power plants, why are there only 450 of them if it's such a good technology? Because every power plant was built as it was an airport. In fact, we need to transform this to make it a building like an airplane. So highly standardized. Of course, it's still expensive, but so the licensing is you do it once for any aircraft type, and then you build 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 of them. I don't know how many jumbo jets are out there, probably over 20,000, nearly 30,000. And that's what I believe will happen. Not only us at Dual Fluid Energy, but many of our competitors will be mature by mid of 2030s. We will have we will find funding. It is an enormous opportunity. It's about 16,000 gigawatt in power stations by mid of century. Many of them will be deployed here in Europe. With those new, this is just power stations, it's not including the industrial heat sources, and there is hundreds and thousands of locations where you need industrial heat at a level of several megawatt to several hundred megawatts. So it's exactly the space for nuclear energy to fill in. I still hope for the very good support from the Polish government for us, for the sector. I'm following closely what Poland is doing, and actually, yes, we will miss the 2030 target, maybe the 2040 target, or certainly, but 2050 we might be able to do it, and we might do it in a cost-effective way. Why? Because these ideas that you could do this all from weather-dependent energy sources, it's fading, and I count very much on the Eastern European countries that they unite, the Visegrad countries, maybe together with the Baltic countries and France, that they create some, or talk sense into the German-speaking countries, and really do an energy transformation, but of course it has to include nuclear energy in its most modern form. So yes, I'm optimistic for mid-century.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Time's up. We could go on talking like this, but unfortunately we do have time constraints. I would like to thank the organizers for making it possible for me to be the moderator. Let me thank the panelists, and let me thank the interpreters for their very professional job. And also, on a positive note, let me tell you that I'm happy that I live in this country where the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of State Assets, who's in charge of all the power plants, and the President speak in one voice. Transformation, yes, but a commonsensical one and a reasonable one. And I wish you to all the guests from abroad, I wish you the same in your country. Thank you.